Welcome everybody. What are we covering? We're going to kind of take a deep dive into some advanced portal techniques and specifically enhancing your forms, creating custom forms with custom variables, but I just thought it was fun to call them variables and spell them differently. Anyway, what are you going to learn today? We are going to show you how to systematically replace your form variables with your own custom inputs. So like I've done here, I've imported the ng material library, which is the third-party JavaScript library out there. And I've created reusable replacements for all of these fields that normally appear on the out-of-the-box ask a question record producer. So we're going to look at several components that it took to do this. Now this is similar to a share of the wealth that I did a while back. But what I did in that one is I showed you how you could replace some form inputs. So we're going to repeat that small little bit, but this is more about making that more of a reusable solution. This is very applicable to actually enhancing your forms, but what you learn here is hopefully some Angular tools for your toolkit that you'll be able to do, all kinds of other things with. So we'll be looking at how to connect your form up to your widget using the gform object. We'll be creating a widget variable with some fun client script stuff in there. We'll use an Angular provider and a template, create some reusable form input templates, and we'll be using a widget dependency to import the ng material library. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the demo. I've already got this all built out, so we're just going to kind of walk through the components and maybe play with them a little bit. All right, so what we're looking at here is just an out-of-the-box catalog page, catalog widget, right? Nothing special I did to anything in the portal here, but what I did is I added a widget variable to the ask a question catalog item that transformed it into this. So we've got our regular old input there, nothing really special about that, but we have a different kind of input selection for the select box. For your input fields here, we have different types of fields that are kind of fun to use. And then, I've added in also the ability to just easily show and hide the help text in any way that you want. So, I've set forth just a very basic template of setting you on your way to a few things, but hopefully you guys can take this in other directions and do much fancier stuff with it or add on to it. All right, so let's take a look at how this was built. So I'm in a Paris instance here, and I've got everything in an update set. I can publish this out afterwards. So let's go to ask a question. Actually, that's under record producers. So the only change I made to this record producer is I added a widget variable, right? I called it variables. Okay, and of course that's pointing to this custom widget that I made, variables. So that's all I had to do to this record producer. Everything else happens in the widget. So let's go ahead and go right to that widget. So let's take a look. Well, here, let's go into the client script first. So I think you might be surprised at actually how easy or how little code all this took. So the very first thing I did in my client script is, I just create a reference to gform, right? Gform is going to give me everything that you would normally get from gform, when you're doing client scripting, when there's a form present on the page. Next thing I did is I just identified the types of fields that I want to replace, because I don't have templates in there for everything yet. I just did this for 4 different types of fields. And then this code right here, what this does, I'm populating a fields array with, so you can see what I'm doing here is I'm getting all the field names on the form. And for each one, I'm just seeing if it's one of the types that I want to replace. And if it is, then I'm pushing that field to my fields array. So that's then the array of fields that I'm going to use then when I print out my custom templates. All right, so how am I printing out those custom templates? So you see over here in my HTML template, it's very easy. I'm using my own custom directive and repeating that for every field in my fields array. So, right, the fields is just, the fields that are of these type. So let's take a look at this directive here now. How did I do this? Why do we do this? So directives are a great feature of AngularJS. Really, that's kind of like the crux of it, the ability to have these directives in your template. To create one in ServiceNow, you go to Angular providers. Well, actually, you can see right here. So here's my widget, right? Variables. If you go to the Angular providers list, I created this here. This is what my directive looks like. Actually, just open it right here. Right, got it here too. So let's close these down. So you've got a few different kinds of directives, right? Or actually really mainly three. You've got different kinds of providers, right? There's directives, services, factories. So this is a directive. I'll just kind of walk through each of these properties pretty strictly. So this one tells how I call this provider or how I call this directive. So I'm using E. E stands for element. So that means my element name is actually going to be the name of my directive. And it does the camel case to conversion automatically, right? So I name it this camel case, but then this is how I call it. And then scope, this is where I'm tying right here, this field object to whatever I pass in as field. So you can see right here, I just have a variable that I defined called field, and I'm passing in my field that I'm iterating over. Replace is true. This is just saying that, I'm going to replace this whole line with whatever template that I provide. So this is where it gets fun here. So this is where you can, maybe if you've seen other directives, you've seen them actually write the template out right in here, and it really sucks because you have to pass everything, your whole template, all your HTML in as string. That's really lame. So use template URL. So how you use that, now there's no module for this. There's no way to get to it. You got to go to it manually. SPNG template, that's the table. All right, so here's the one that I created, variable field template. So each one of these templates gets assigned to one and one only widget. So I've assigned it to mine here. So this is where I have my templates for the different input types that you might have, but we don't need to look at it here because we actually have it here in our widget editor too. Right, I can look at it over here. So this whole template is what's going to be inserted right here for every one of my fields. And of course, we use a template file because obviously I don't have to write everything as strings here. It's just much easier to manage. One note about your templates, do remember that your templates can only have one root element. See how I have MD input container, and that's it, and that's what closes it. I can't have another div down here. That's gonna mess things up. Actually, it'll error out on you. Okay, so let's take a look into what I'm doing with each of these input templates to tie them to the fields. Because here, let me do something here really quick. Let me just comment this out, and we'll demonstrate something. Okay, so what I did, I just turned off my line where I was hiding the original variables just so that we could see them all here. And just so you could see that, say what I typed in the short description, see how it populated down here? Because I've got all my custom ones bound to the original field. I didn't necessarily create new ones. I'm creating new templates and binding the values of those templates. So let's go take a look at how I do that. Okay. So this is repeated for each field, right? I put a switch on here. So we're going to switch on each type. And so for all of them, regardless, I'm going to print their label. So now you can see when I have a string, this is my input. When I have a text area type, this is mine. A reference is this, a choice is here. All of them, I'm giving them a unique ID, just whatever their field name is. Then I use ng model. So this is another Angular directive that you can use to bind the value of something to one of the variables in your scope, right? And in this case, the value of this field. And there's all kinds of other things that we know about that field that I can use to control this input, right? I know it's max length. I know when it's mandatory or not based upon this property, when it's read-only, or when it's visible. See, so when it's not visible, I just hide the whole dang thing. Or let's look at text area. I guess there's nothing really that different about that one. Now the record picker, so this is using the ServiceNow one, right? This isn't anything special here. There is an NG material component that works like a record picker. That's going to take a lot more work because you're going to have to do, a REST call to actually perform the queries and stuff yourself. So I got to finish writing that. But when I finish that, I think that's going to be a pretty awesome component that everyone might want to use. So yeah, so for reference, I'm just using a regular old record picker field. But then choice, we're using an NG material component. So we know what choices are available. So I can print out all of their choices. This is just the toggle for showing or hiding the field help text. So these behave the way they do, right, because they are NG material components. All right, I've imported that library through dependencies. So if I look at our widget, and we go down to dependencies, you see how I have one called NG material. So this is a way, you may have used these before, maybe preaching the crowd to a lot of you, but this is a way to bring in third-party libraries, scripts, CSS, things like that into your widgets or to your page. So this one, NG material, you want that one to load on page load. And so then I've selected just this service portal. Otherwise, it could load in all portals. And then so for NG material, yes, I loaded the NG material JS just into a UI script. And so I'm pulling that in through this part. And then the CSS is just a style sheet also. I'm just calling that one in by URL. So that's how these fields behave and look this way, right? I didn't have to do anything extra just because I pulled these libraries in and that's where it's getting the styles and the behavior from. So as you can see, all I had to do is define, I just had to figure out with NG material, which properties are relevant for each one. And the documentation is pretty good for those also. Okay, so then to hide the original ones, that is in our link function. So whenever you do DOM manipulation in your widgets, you want to make sure you do that in your link function as a best practice. You can do it in the client script, but you're really supposed to keep that all in the link function. What I'm doing here is I'm just going through that array of fields that I created. And for each one, I'm finding the original one, right? Because out of the box, their templates all get printed out with the ID of their field name. I also gave them the same kind of ID, but none of them are on a div. I may want to tighten that up a little bit just to make sure that I don't eventually end up hiding my own accidentally. But anyways, that's how I'm doing it now. And so I'm just adding the class of ng hide to those. So it doesn't remove them, it just hides them. Let's go ahead and save that. All right, let's refresh this. So what these are doing, as you can see, these are really just kind of controlling the original fields that are still on the form. They're just hidden. All right, this is just a new layer of it. All right, and let's just test this, submit it. All right, so everything's set properly. My user, my description, my short description. Also, we just wanted to double check that what if I tried submitting it without, it's still going to tell me short descriptions required. And I do have an asterisk there. It's not very big, so you might want to adjust the CSS a little bit on these to show how I did that, right? What was that? That was the short description, so that was a string. So to set an attribute dynamically, just do ng, and that attribute, in this case, required, disabled, and we have those properties from the gform object that we can use. Okay, let's see. Anything else that I wanted to show you here? Yeah, so nothing in the server script here, right? So if I wanted to keep adding on to this, right, I would, want to keep building out each of these different field types, right? Figure out exactly what properties I'm going to want to maintain for them, figure out where in the gform object that I could find that information. Yeah, so my next step is to, here, actually, I'll just show you that right here. So ng material. So here's the ng material library. If you go to demos, you can see here, I'll actually show you, it's the autocomplete. Yeah, so this is essentially what our reference field would be, right? Something like this. It shows you how it's done, right? So you can just take this code and everything, copy it right into your widgets. This one, of course, is going to be a lot more complicated. You know, they have a lot of different, I mean, there are several different functions used to maintain the list. And, you know, what I would have to do is, like I mentioned earlier, set up a REST call so that I actually go and do the glide record with the appropriate reference qualifier and everything to populate this list. So that's something I'm still working on. Some of these other ones are super simple. Like just for example, the inputs, you know, go and check those out. So like there's the first name. Let's go see how they did that. There it is. Just copy that right in your template. I mean, as long as you've got the ng material dependencies set up. Yeah, you got a lot of different components that you can use here. A lot of fun stuff. So like the select box is this one right here. Right, and so you've got ways of deactivating certain items in it, different ways of styling them, or not necessarily styling them, but you know, you can have different types of selections. So check this stuff out. These components are nice, and you know, as you can see, it's not that hard. It's just a matter of matching up the appropriate properties to your GForm properties. But that's about it. You know, you saw how easy it was. You just, once you get this widget set up, you can throw this on any catalog item to replace any variables. So if you wanted to, say you've got one catalog item where you want to replace the string fields. You got another one where, like this case, where you want to replace all of these kinds. What I would do in that case is create two different variables, one for each scenario, and you know, you would just change this.
I've got a question. Would all of the client scripts and UI policies still work if you did this?
Yes, because here, let's go ahead and turn this piece off again so that we show those. So these respond immediately to any changes. See that? That's now medium. And so, you know, say you have a client script or whatever checking for values and it's going to stop the form, or like in this case, you know, I don't have the short description populated, so it's just not going to let me. So anything that you've got going on client script UI policy wise, you know, say I select one of these and now description should disappear. It's going to happen because we've gone through the trouble of binding all of those properties. So like, for example, so we know when it's required, we know when it's disabled, we know when it's visible. So these are all responding to that original GForm field object. So any changes, you know, it goes two-way. Any changes we make down here happen up here. And any changes or rules up here also get enforced down here.
Hey Jeff, great presentation by the way. I do have one question. In the SN record picker, that one's supposed to replay the reference, right? Which property is the one that binds the data? I didn't see any in there, versus the other one is NG models, right? How would the record gets created with know which data is this?
Yeah, so this one is a ServiceNow directive, right? These other ones, well, these two are just standard HTML elements. Right. This one is an ng material directive, and this one is one that ServiceNow created. So it's right here. So it's this property here, field, that actually does the ng model and stuff behind the scenes.
Oh, got it. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So there are a lot of other field types that can be done here, and you know, of course, just the ng material is one way I did it. Right, there are a lot of other libraries out there for form elements. Another thing you can do now also is we can attach these in our dependency. So this is this is my Angular provider that I created. Right, ain't a whole lot to it, right? Because I'm pointing to this other template file that does most of the work. But we can provide all kinds of your own functions here for responding to form interactions. right? And, when to show messages and things like that. So if you ever do want to get really fancy with it, you just come here into your directive and start manipulating your form. Thanks for attending. Feel free to reach out with any questions.